Hello my wonderful patrons, I am so happy that you are here today. This is a tutorial about how I draw hair. We all love adding hair to our characters, so I wasn't surprised when you guys voted for this tutorial. The video is quite long, so I divided everything into 5 chapters, which are hair types, shape and volume, movement and details, hairstyles, and coloring. So let's jump right in. Before you start drawing hair, it's good to know about the different hair types. The hair type is basically all about the curl pattern. This is a picture I found on Google which shows all different hair types. So I would say I would be a 1C or a 2A, mostly straight but a little bit wavy. Anyways, because I don't want this video to get too long, I will show you how I will draw stick straight hair, wavy with bangs, coily hair, and also a short haircut, which has nothing to do with the hair type, but I still wanted to include it and show you how I would draw that. After you figured out the hair type that you will draw, you can think about shape and volume. When I draw hair, I don't start with a single strand, but I rather focus on the general shape and volume first. Things like hair thickness and hairstyle play a big role in this step because thinner hair has less volume and thicker hair has more volume. And also the hairstyle determines the shape and the volume, so it all plays together. Later in this video I will walk you through different hairstyles as well. Anyways, what I see when I look at this reference picture is that the hair is straight, so even though you can maybe think that she has no volume on her roots, it's super important to always leave a gap between the scalp and the hair shape. Because hair grows up first and then gets pulled down by gravity, so you always have a bit of volume, and it's important to capture that. It's almost like imagining the hair as a Lego figure type of hair that you can click on the little mannequins. You just want to sketch the outer shape while focusing on the weight of the hair. Her bangs are shorter than the rest, so they are more bouncy and lift up more compared to the longer rest of the hair. When it comes to wavy hair, you can already add the waves to the shape that you add first. This hair has more volume and looks thicker, so I will try to capture that. As always, I use a soft, white, flowy brush for my first sketch, so it's easier to focus on the shape and not get lost in details already. I used the Max Gouache Clean brush. I will link it in the description. Next up, we have coily hair. Again, I only focus on the outer shape and volume first. This hair type usually has a lot of volume due to the tight curls. Again, think of it as a Lego hairpiece in this first step. I also add the hair that frames the face, and I use short strokes to already give a feeling of this nice fluffy and curly hair. I want to make the hair look a little heavier, so I use the liquify tool to pull it down and take some of the volume from the top away. As you can see here, the hair goes up first, but since the individual hair is actually super long, it's just in such tight curls that it appears to be shorter, but the weight is still there. Okay, now let's move on to this short haircut. This hair is lighter because it's short, so we have a lot of floof and volume for its hair type. It is cut in a lot of layers too, and we have some pieces sticking out at the back, for example, which is very characteristic for this haircut. The next step is movement and details. Now it's time to think about the directions of the individual hair strands. I usually divide this step into sketch and clean outlines, but if you feel confident, you don't really need 2 steps here. In this straight hair example, the hair goes down straight and then flips into different directions at the end. The hair is tucked behind the ear, but the ear is covered by hair as well. And of course, we have the long bangs. I lower the opacity of my first sketch and draw on a layer on top of it. This time around, I focus more on the movement, and I pay attention to which hair strands give me information and therefore need to be included, and which hair strands are just part of a bigger chunk of hair, so it can be left out. Don't try to draw every hair strand. It's unnecessary and it will drive you crazy. For my rough sketches and the warm-ups, I would leave it at this point, but if I want to make a clean outline, I will go over it one more time now that I figured out the movement. For the cleaner outline, I make sure to decrease my brush size so I can make a crisp and clean line. At this stage, I emphasize and push the shapes to make it more stylized. I also add these finer lines to show the direction of the hair, aka how the hair falls. Once I'm done, I love to make the lines thicker in some areas, like everywhere where two lines meet or hair overlaps, and of course on the outer lines as well. I made a tutorial about line art already where I go more into detail on that, so feel free to check that out if you want more information. Link is in the description. Now I'm adding movement and details to the wavy hair. I usually like to start with the front part of the hair, like the parting or the bangs, and I build my way up from there. I make sure to give enough volume and to keep my hands loose and soft while drawing to maintain a flowy look. I love to not think too much about every single strand, but to rather keep it loose and to see what comes out at the end. Even if that means to redo a line a couple of times, but I used to make the mistake of drawing my hair too stiff because I was overthinking it. If you are unsure how to draw the ends of the hair, try to bunch them up into a couple of pieces and make some smaller and others bigger to balance everything out. Also, you can see how the ends here go into different directions, so this is also something that helps to make the drawing look more natural. Now I'm going over it one more time to get the clean outlines. As I already said earlier, I don't do this step very often, but if I do want to make clean outlines, it really helps me to draw the more sketchy movement lines first, because then I can add the outlines more confidently. And as you can see, I'm mixing up thin and thick lines to make the lines look more dynamic. Lines that show the movement are thinner and lines that show the different chunks of hair are thicker, if that makes sense. Also, always pay attention to the different layers. There are some shorter pieces around her face that make her bangs blend into the hair. Let's move on to coily hair. The technique is the same, but since the hair is more wild and untamed, I like to draw shorter lines and make them curved. Another tip I have for you is that not all lines need to be connected. I used to waste so much energy on trying to make the lines connect while still trying to keep the hair looking dynamic and real. But I realized I don't need to do that, and it's so much easier. Instead of drawing long lines, I draw short curved lines to show the volume of the hair. And I draw most of them into the bottom part of the hair because that's where the weight is, and I try to emphasize that. When I draw coily hair, I also like to add these separate curved lines around the silhouette to show the tight curls and the pieces that stick out. And now it's time for another round of clean outlines on a new layer. As I already said, the main focus for me is to draw short lines to show the curls. On to the short haircut. I've already established the shape of the hair, and now when I draw in the movement lines, I need to pay extra attention to the short layers. When you look closely, you will see the hair goes into all different directions, and it's also a bit curly, and the bangs are longer pieces of hair. Whenever I feel like the shape is a little bit off, I use the liquify tool to push the lines around. And now, you already guessed it, I'm adding clean outlines on a new layer. What kind of hair tutorial would this be if I wouldn't show you how I draw different hairstyles, right? So the steps and technique are the same, but I thought maybe it will be helpful for you to see how I would draw different hairstyles. Here we have a long messy ponytail, a half up, half down hairstyle, braids, and a bun. Let's start with the ponytail. I always start with the hairline, so in this photo the hairline goes something like this and then all hair go up towards the ponytail, so this is the second point that I need. This hair is quite long, so it is probably heavy and the gravity pulls down this high ponytail, also because it's messy, so when we draw the back of your head, the hair has a much bigger gap right where the neck starts. Okay, so this was just to show you my thought process, but I actually don't draw the hairline this obvious. I just have it in my mind, but I don't really draw it. When I draw ponytails, I always exaggerate the shape because I love how it looks like. When you draw the hair strands that come out of the hair tie, it's important to show the volume with these curved lines instead of going straight down. Let's move on to the half up, half down hairstyle. I'm starting again at the parting and then I go from there. So we have some loose strands in the front and then the upper part of the hair goes to the back of her head, but very messy and loose. One thing to keep in mind here is that there's a bit of volume on the top part of the hair because it's clipped back, but then to make it look messy, she probably pulled out some pieces. I'm gonna let you watch the process now because the steps are the same and I will be back when we draw braids. The braids are probably the most complicated hairstyle in this video, but don't worry, I will break it down into simple steps. Right now, I'm just drawing what I see on the reference photo. It helps a lot to have reference photos when you draw braids because there's absolutely no reason to memorize how to draw braids from the beginning. In this example, you look at the braid from the front, but what if you want to draw braids from the side? There's an easy way I often use. Basically, I draw one half of the braid first, and I draw these squished shapes and I stack them on top of each other, kind of like if you would draw a rope. And then I just add small curved lines to the other side and it looks like a braid from the side. Okay, with that in mind, I start with the front part again. Since she is facing away from us, I will draw one braid from the side and the other braid from the front. You can always use the selection tool to adjust the size and move the braid around. You guys know I love a good loose hairstyle, so I decided to give her some bangs to make it look a bit more relaxed. I also added a lot more volume to her hair. That's something I always do, and I absolutely love drawing long, fluffy hair with lots of volume. Last hairstyle before we go into the coloring. I established the hairline first and also the location of her bun. The hairstyle is not loose at all, so I won't make the gap between her hair and the back of her head as big as I did with the messy ponytail this time. There's a bit of volume right at the front, so I'll make sure I include that in the drawing. The bun is not just a perfect ball sitting on top of the head, but instead you can divide it into different parts. So here we have this big part in the front and then a smaller one, and then we have some hair sticking out at the back. So let's draw that. This looks good so far. Now it's time for clean outlines. Finally, it's time for colors. You guys know my way of coloring is always very simple and flat, not painterly really, so I will show you how I would color these 3 hair sets. Okay, so while coloring, I felt like I could make the lines even cleaner, so here you can see me working on another layer of lines first before we jump into the colors. I will fast forward it because it's just always the same and I don't want to bore you. I create a layer underneath the outline layer and I pick the syrup brush and then I use a color from my hair and skin color palette. It's the blonde tone that I like to use most. I will leave a link in the description as well. And then I just fill in the entire shape with a base color. The next thing I want to do is I want to make the roots a little bit darker. So I add a new layer on top of the base color and I tap on clipping mask, so now I can only draw on the base layer. Then I color pick the base color and I move the hue slider to the left so it's a warmer color, and then I select a slightly darker color. I use the soft brush for a nice soft gradient and brush over everything from the top just like this. I like to color these little parts and the front pieces even darker. Next, I want to draw extra hair strands all around the head, so I create a new layer above the outline layer, and I love using the chalk brush for this. I just go over the outer parts of her hair and I use different sizes of strokes to make it look more natural. The next thing I do is adding shadows. I do that the same way I always add shadows. I add a new layer. On top of everything, I set it to multiply, and then I use the chalk brush, but you can basically use whichever brush you prefer. And then I use a very, very bright and desaturated, creamy-ish, warm color for the shadow. Here, I'm not looking at the reference picture anymore to know the exact position of the shadows, but instead I imagine the hair as a 3D shape, and this helps me to place down the shadows. I already made a tutorial about shadow and light and my technique, so feel free to check this in the description as well. The next step is one I always tend to forget until the very end. I don't know why, but I'm talking about highlights. I used to make the highlights way more intense, but lately I prefer a more simple look. So I add a new layer below the outline layer this time, and I color pick the hair color to know my base, and then I move the slider upwards to get a matching highlight color. You can also use an overlay layer for this. I use the syrup brush and follow the shape of the head. The technique I use to add highlights is I basically add blobs of color and then I erase some part to create those shapes. So I give more emphasis to the different chunks of hair, if that makes sense. Okay, let's color the coily hair. Since I added another clean outline to the previous hairstyle, I'm gonna do the same to this one as well. Since the outer lines of the hair are so curly and wild, I would go for the selection tool to add the base color instead of using an actual brush. So I go to the selection tool and then select freehand and color fill. I already picked a dark brown color before. And then I'm selecting the whole shape, and when I'm done, I tap on the dot and it autofills everything with the color I previously selected. Just like this. Now I want to darken the little front pieces, so I add a new layer and I make it a clipping mask, and then I darken those little parts. I'm seeing the hair as a 3D shape and I want to darken the lower part to show that more clearly. I decided to use the selection tool again, but this time I'm feathering it out to get a gradient. I used the brightness slider to darken it. It already looks so much better now. So now I will create a new layer on top of the outline layer again to add those little extra individual strands of hair. I also wanted to add shadows, but I kept them simple. The technique is the same as always. I create a layer in multiply mode and then I select a bright, creamy, desaturated warm color like this one, and I just put a small shadow underneath the curls and on the roots. Now I bring back the reference photo that we used because I wanted to see what kind of highlight she has in her hair. Coily hair has diffused highlights because of its texture, so you can't really see a clear highlight, but you can see those lighter parts on the tips. Again, I color pick the hair color for my base and then I move the slider up to get a good highlight color. I was looking for a good texture brush to paint in the highlights and I found the Max U colored pencil great for that. But of course, it's not necessary. You can use any texture brush that you like. And then I'm painting that in and building it up, and I use a bigger brush size for that. I also darkened the lower part of her hair again because I felt like it was a little bit too light. Here I play around with the saturation slider to make her hair look warmer. And to give a soft, lighter gradient to the tips of her hair, I select the areas that I want to lighten, then I feather my selection, and then I go into the adjustment sliders again and I brighten everything up. Don't forget to always increase the saturation when you increase the brightness, because otherwise the color will look washed out. As you can see, my coloring process of this hair type was quite different compared to the first example, but for me personally, it's easier and more fun like that. Let's move on now to our last hairstyle that we will color together, and this is the bun. First of all, I use this brown color, but I need to darken the outlines because they are too light for the hair color. And then I just fill everything in with the syrup brush. To color the hair tie, I give it a base color first. I pick the red one here. And then I go to the layer and tap on Alpha Lock. Now I can only paint on the hair tie, and it makes it so much easier to add the colored details. I basically just color pick from the reference photo to make things easier here. You can see on the reference photo that the lower back of her hair is darker and also around the bun. So I create a new layer on top of the base color and make it a clipping mask, and then I use the soft brush to lightly brush in a darker brown color, like this. Then I'm adding some of those extra hair strands all around her hair to make everything look more natural. As always, I added a layer on top of the outlines and I used the chalk brush. Now I'm adding shadows again on a multiply layer. And then, as always, I add a simple round of highlights on a new layer underneath the outlines, and I pick a slightly lighter color than my base, and I add these color blobs and I erase them out afterwards to get those nice shapes. Okay, my loves, this was everything I know about drawing hair, and I really hope you found it helpful. Here is a little summary because I know this video is a bit longer than I originally wanted it to be. So when I draw hair, I always start with the general shape and volume first. Think of it as the Lego figures hair that you can click on the mannequins. After that, I add movement and details, and it's important to not even try to draw every single hair strand. Look closely and try to figure out which hair strand give information and therefore need to be included, and which hair strands are just part of a bigger mass and therefore can be left out. Hair always grows up first and then falls down because of gravity, so lift your hair up from the roots. Pay attention to the different layers and lengths and keep it loose. This takes a bit of practice for sure, to keep it loose while still getting the hair to look right and natural, but keeping it loose, not focusing on perfecting everything, and relaxing my hand while drawing hair really helped me to get my hair to look so fluffy. This was everything for this tutorial. I would love if you tag me if you use these tips so I can see. The next tutorial will be about facial expressions, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for supporting what I do here on Patreon. I am so grateful for each and every single one of you. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of the day and I see you. Bye!